So for those who have just joined, please do keep your microphones off, keep on mute. We're recording it, so if you don't want your face on camera, please do turn your camera off. But welcome to today's Sprint webinar on setting AI strategy. It's the final webinar in our AI webinar series, so please do check out our YouTube channel for the recordings from the previous webinars in case you missed them. And we will be having more webinars added to the schedule, so do keep an eye out on our Sprint website. I will now hand over to the fabulous Sean Rafter, who is our data AI machine learning subject matter expert at Firebrand Training, and I'll leave you in his very capable hands.
Thank you very much, Anita. So like Anita said, this is the fourth webinar in a series of four, all around kind of generative AI, co-pilots, and this one is AI strategy setting. So we're going to deep dive some of the key facets that organizations will need to consider when starting on that journey, and whether you're starting on that journey, evolving your journey, or you're kind of a leader in the space. Hopefully there'll be something useful that you can get out of the session today. But yeah, we're going to be talking all about AI strategies, and potentially quite a big focus on some of the foundations that you'll need to have in as an organization if you're realistically going to start investing money in artificial intelligence, be they products or services. Reality is you're going to need to have a relatively mature and strong data function, and the organizations that have got the stronger data functions, they're probably going to find that kind of transformation, that transition, that evolution into artificial intelligence a little bit easier than others. They're probably likely to see a great return on investment, but we'll not spoil the fun. We'll kind of take the slides in sequence as we normally would do. And so the first one is just to get back to that kind of almost foundational and fundamental understanding. And if you've been on the other three webinars, this will clearly be a little bit of repetition. We call that a spiral curriculum. But artificial intelligence, remember that is that simulation of human intelligence, so in machines, and they're programmed to think like humans, mimic their actions, for instance. You could also apply that term to any machine that exhibits traits associated with the human mind. So that could be learning, problem solving, kind of advanced communication, interpreting emotion, that type of thing. So that's the kind of generic understanding and definition around artificial intelligence. Actually, quite interestingly, there are kind of three subsets of artificial intelligence as well. And actually, I think this starts to and helps to separate the kind of hype and maybe some of the things we've seen in terms of science fiction films potentially with the actual reality that's ongoing on the ground. So like I said, there's three different types of artificial intelligence as it stands. Who's to say there will not be a fourth or a fifth added in kind of time, and maybe people will have kind of different interpretations in terms of these categories. But generally speaking, there are three: artificial narrow intelligence, artificial general intelligence, and artificial super intelligence. And you can see they're also kind of subcategorized as well. Artificial narrow intelligence is kind of defined as weak AI, whereas general intelligence and super intelligence, they're defined as strong AI. And so weak AI, that's defined by its ability to complete really specific tasks. So that could be winning a game of chess, maybe identifying a specific individuals in a series of photos, so image recognition or facial recognition. And as we moved into stronger forms of artificial intelligence, like general intelligence, like super intelligence, we're going to start to see the incorporation of much more human behaviors. They're going to become markedly more prominent. And that might be the ability to interpret tone or emotion. But examples of weak AI, you can think of, we'll probably come across them all the time as it stands. So stuff like Siri, stuff like Google Home, stuff like Alexa, they are very much scratching the surface of artificial intelligence, but they are still examples of artificial narrow intelligence. They're focused in a specific kind of area. Whereas strong AI, that's where it's defined, and particularly artificial general intelligence, it's defined by its ability in comparison to humans. So for artificial general intelligence, you can expect to see that ability in comparison and performing on par with another human. Whereas artificial super intelligence, also known as super intelligence, that's going to surpass a human's intelligence and ability. And the reality is, and there's kind of a school of thought that suggests that if we do develop artificial super intelligence, I think it's fair to say that we, as a society, we haven't yet developed general intelligence or super intelligence yet, and there's lots of different interpretations about how long it will take us to get there. There's some interpretations that suggest we might be at an artificial general intelligence level within the next couple of years, but I think generally speaking, most people expect artificial superintelligence to maybe be a decade away, maybe a generation away. We really don't know how long it's going to take us to develop AI like artificial superintelligence. But like I said, there's a school of thought that suggests that if we did develop artificial superintelligence, that might be the last thing that humans ever invent, which is actually quite a striking and strange thought. Because if we did develop something that far extends our capabilities from an intellectual level, then we'll never need to invent anything again, because artificial superintelligence will invent better stuff than humans can kind of invent. So a little bit of a strange thought, but actually something that's quite interesting in terms of that trajectory around artificial intelligence. We've obviously got that kind of new area of AI. You'll have seen this in ChatGPT and Google Gemini, Google Bard, Microsoft Copilot, that generative AI piece. And I just wanted to make sure that we're all on the same page in terms of what Gen AI is. And it simply is just a form or a branch of artificial intelligence that is there to develop new and original content. So it could be images, text, audio, video has started to become a bit of a thing in terms of generative AI as well. So really Gen AI it's just AI that's generating content. But actually, we're not here to talk about that. We're here to talk about AI strategies and plans and roadmaps for how organizations, be they private sector, be they public sector, move towards that AI space. So that AI strategy is a comprehensive plan. The aim is to integrate AI into an organization, develop its mission, goals, and values. But the premise for a successful AI strategy really is having a data strategy. And the premise for a really good data strategy is to fundamentally understand where you want to be as a business. What are your must-win battles? Where do you want to and need to succeed in the future? And clearly, access to information and to data is going to play a hugely important role, because data is going to help the definition of business priorities. It is important also to remember that data and AI is probably not going to solve your issues in terms of business models, products, and services. It's going to complement and enhance. And proper uses of data and AI is going to allow organizations to be that more data-led culture, data decision-making. It's going to help us make more informed decisions. It's going to help us obtain information faster, maybe automate processes, and enable the delivery of faster than the human mind can. But they're not going to replace or construct the lack of a business vision and ideas. So I see an AI strategy really in a sequence of kind of processes within an organization. And the first stage is to get those business visions and goals defined. And then the next stage will be around a data model, because we understand that these artificial intelligence algorithms, be they large language models, be they machine learning algorithms, they're heavily based on statistics. And generally speaking, the more good information and good data we can feed to these statistical models, the confidence that those models operate on is going to increase. So data is absolutely fundamental to powering these AI models, these machine learning models, which is why it's really, really important to have open and honest discussions, particularly about how mature you are as an organization or a business or an enterprise, however you want to kind of define it. So really, to get a robust AI strategy in place, you need to have those business kind of missions, visions, goals really well defined, really well communicated. And potentially the next stage is to make sure you've got that data strategy in place. And actually that data strategy shouldn't be just an isolated static document. It should be a document that evolves over time. But one of the really fundamental important stages of a data strategy is that honest appraisal about where we are as a business. And I know that you'll probably be doing exactly the same thing that I do. You'll be looking at some of the bits on the slide here and going, where do I sit as a business? And I think it's fair to say that when you start to break down and start to look at your maturity, you're probably not going to cleanly fit in any one of these kind of categories. So what I've got here is just a little bit of a diagram that will help people understand where you are as a business in terms of your data strategy, to then inform that kind of AI strategy space. And then also to understand, well, if we did want to improve our data maturity, in what kind of areas could we do it? So what I've got across here is relatively kind of rudimental, but You might be at the lower end of data maturity. You might just be exploring data, or you might be an active user in data. You could be a leader in data. You could be an innovator in data as well. So they're the kind of 4 categories in terms of maturity. And then some of the aspects or elements of a business can be measured down the left-hand side here. So we've got stuff like, well, how effective is your business strategy? What's your data kind of approach like? What's your cultural approach to data? Does your architecture allow the kind of assimilation and kind of processing of huge volumes of data potentially? What are your governance processes like? And something that's actually really heartening to see, and one of the things that I kind of drill into anyone I speak to, be they a client, be they a learner at Firebrand, is that too much of the time, and I've done exactly this. So this is kind of me reflecting on my own kind of self appraisal of what I was doing at work. Everyone is just absolutely laser focused on internal data sets. More than likely, we've got so much data that we're recording internally that it's difficult to kind of broaden our horizons, change that field of view, and start to consider different data sets. And I think that's probably one of the most important bits in terms of that maturity around data. The more mature you are around data, the more open you are to expanding your field of view beyond the information you're recording, maybe operationally or as a business. So we'll go through each kind of one of these bits and kind of try to bring them to life a little bit. So if you're a data explorer, in terms of the business strategy, you may be only using data for reporting purposes. Whereas if you're a user, you might be using data to start driving business decisions. So you can see how data is informing how organizations work, be it from a performance management process, be it from a strategy, demand, and forecasting kind of approach as well. If you're a data leader, you're building strategies. They're built from data. Data is informing where you should strategize, where you should plan. And if you're in an innovator space, not only are you kind of building those data strategies from data, but you're evolving them over time as well, because the landscape kind of never stays static, particularly around data, particularly around the kind of evolution in tech that we're all experiencing and have experienced and probably will continue to experience into the future. In terms of your actual use of data, if you're an explorer, you probably just got that laser focus. You're focused on your own recorded data, your own collected data. You're laser focused on that. If you start to move into a bit of a more mature space, so maybe you're a user, you're starting to look at other data providers. So how can other third-party providers, how can they help you enrich your data and supplement your internal data? So it might be you've got lots and lots of information recorded about your customers, but you don't know where your customer lives or how old they are, or you've got little gaps in kind of your ability to collect data. And there may be perfectly legitimate gaps. There's nothing to say you have to record this information. It might not be appropriate for the kind of business that you're in. But if you're a user of data, you're starting to consider that data enrichment place. How can I get data to enrich the current data sets, the internal data sets I've got? If you're in that leader space, you very much are enriching data, and you recognize that third-party data can be used for a competitive advantage. And if you're an innovator in that space, you're constantly looking to leverage external data sets, and it might be from non-obvious sources as well. So it might be that you're using some publicly available data, it might be using some scientific data, but actually, if there's a valid reason to enhance and enrich your data in that fashion, then those non-obvious sources might be a USP. There might be a really good kind of competitive edge. In terms of your culture, if you're kind of at the beginning of a data maturity kind of roadmap, direction, transformation, you might well be leaving your data analytics left to individuals. You might just have local analytics teams. You might not have an analytical team at all. It might be left to a manager or a team leader and a specific individual to kind of ensure they've got that data-led approach. Slightly more mature, you're going to be using data to measure results, but they might not be used in planning. When we get into that leader space, decision makers are using data analytics to maximize business outcomes. They're using data analytics to performance manage how well they're doing against their outcomes. They're using data to inform what outcomes they should have. And if you're in that innovator space, you're probably starting to look at AI and ML, using that to adapt and improve any of your business objectives as well, be they process optimization, maybe they're helping your decision-making processes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then you've got to think in terms of the architecture piece. How mature are we in terms of the architecture that we've got? So if you're relatively immature, you're an explorer in the area, you've probably not got a cohesive kind of data architecture. As we start to become more mature in that architecture space, you're probably looking at automation and maybe the analytics around some of the data flows that you've got. Maybe you're starting to have a greater requirement for that data engineer space. When you're starting to move into the leader piece around architecture, your data architecture is really well considered, really well thought out. And the result of that is it allows functions and members across the business to be data driven. And then when you're in that innovator space, your architecture does all of those things that we've kind of taken you through, but it also is there for that big data piece. So that high velocity, veracity, variety of data, as many V's as you can kind of throw at a page. But your architecture supports maybe real-time processing, real-time analytics, maybe in a place where it can support the processing of hundreds of millions of records in a day, in a minute, in an hour, whatever your organization kind of needs to do. But what that will do is will allow you, if you do have that ability to kind of process huge volumes and velocities of data, that puts you in a really good place to start making those machine learning, those AI related decisions, because they're going to require a lot of information and you're going to want that responsiveness piece. You're going to want those decisions to be made quickly. In terms of that governance piece, if you're an explorer, your governance is probably manual and maybe a little bit inconsistent. When you move on to that user space, you have got those data quality protections and processes in place. When you're into that leader place, you've got universal kind of organizational confidence in the data and the insights generated, because you've got really robust governance processes. It might be a master data management team in there as well. You're really, really sure about your data. You're confident. You're checking its accuracy. You're checking where it's come from. You're checking those processes. And by having really good confidence in where your data is coming from, you're going to be able to generate really confident insights as well. And when we move to that innovator space, data governance isn't necessarily a separate thing. It's kind of woven and integrated into all business processes. Everybody has a part to play in governance, and everyone does have a part to play in kind of data governance. And perhaps the most interesting and cool bit for me is just the art of the possible, doing something a little bit different, kind of the very definition of being a firebrand. And this is the direction, whether you're going in an artificial intelligence or machine learning direction as an organization, I think whether you are or whether you're not, this is probably going to be a big unique selling point, a big competitive advantage. That ability to procure and onboard those third-party data sets. So breaking that laser focused on your own operational data and starting to become more mature in terms of bringing data sets into your business externally. And clearly there's obviously, you wouldn't be doing that for nothing. You're going to be doing that to enhance the decision-making processes. So if you're an explorer in terms of this maturity gauge, you're not using external data sets. None of them have kind of been onboarded. You might have pockets here and there, but certainly not extensive access to external data sets. When you move into that kind of more mature, that user space is starting to procure and onboard new data sets, but potentially they're only at a local level. When you move into that leader space, you're starting to really streamline the onboarding of new data sets. So you're starting to get much more automated. You probably got quite a number of those data sets coming into the business. And then when you get into that innovator space and maybe you recognize the importance of those third-party data sets, you're going to require some kind of dedicated data procurement and onboarding team. And I don't see many organizations potentially at this stage. Maybe they are, but maybe they haven't kind of articulated the team in terms of a dedicated kind of data procurement team. But I think a lot of organizations in the not too distant future are going to want to be in this position. That clearly there's going to be more third-party providers who are willing to gather the data, cleanse the data, make sure it's fit for purpose for then kind of onward distribution to their clients. So I think more and more organizations are hopefully going to start to kind of extend their field of view. And there's nothing wrong with being laser focused in terms of your operational data. There's absolutely nothing wrong with doing that. And most organizations do that. But I think there is that piece around you don't know what you don't know. And until you start enriching your data sets, it's going to be really difficult to understand what kind of return of investment and what kind of benefit those additional data sets can bring. But I think the way that data is moving, there's going to be a lot more of those third-party providers. There'll be a lot more choice in terms of the data that you can get. And then it's obviously a business decision in terms of whether you want to go down that path of enriching your own data sets. But I suspect a lot of businesses will do. So we haven't even got to kind of an AI strategy piece yet. And I suppose one of the main messages from me personally is that clearly no organization, we're not in the business of wasting money or time or effort. So we want to make sure that the investments we make are as sensible or as justified as possible. And by having a really strong data function, being as mature as possible in terms of data, you're probably going to make that move and that assimilation and that evolution into AI and ML a little bit easier. So the more mature you are from a data space, the easier it is going to be to implement AI and ML. But that's not to say that organizations that maybe aren't as mature, that's not going to stop them buying an off-the-shelf product that's going to generate them huge amounts of revenue in terms of some of the products and services that they get. But it's certainly fair to say you're probably going to get more profit. You're probably going to be more profitable if you've got that really robust kind of data foundation behind you as well. So actually, what does a data strategy look like? And how is it formed? Well, you're not going to have a data strategy. You're going to have some kind of business strategy that underpins it, because what is the data strategy going to look to govern or control or collect? If the data strategy doesn't know the business strategy, you really are a little bit stuck. And what needs to happen, or what will commonly happen, and this is not an exhaustive or a definitive list of some kind of the facets of a lot of businesses, but the individual business units should be informing a business strategy. That should inform a data strategy. When you've got a data strategy in place, you understand maybe that you could get to an AI strategy space. And when you develop this AI strategy, it's probably going to start to have an impact in terms of the type of data that you record. Does it need to be enriched? Does it not need to be enriched? Is it clean enough to be able to start powering some of these AI algorithms or machine learning algorithms? So the kind of interaction between a data and AI strategy, you can see what I'm doing with the mouse here, very much cyclical. It's going to constantly evolve. You'll find new capabilities within AI. That's going to require a new stream of data. You need to capture that in your data strategy. Maybe there'll be an additional arrow here that, well, we didn't know we could do this in terms of artificial intelligence, and we've lined up our data to allow us to do this. Well, that's an entirely new business strategy, division, process that might start to impact on your business strategy as well. But generally speaking, it's generally recommended to have a well-defined data strategy in place before embarking on an AI strategy. Don't not do it because Sean says. Everything is going to be specific and individual to your own organization. Everyone is in a different place, in a different kind of environment, etc., etc. So it needs to be characterized to your own organization. But generally, it's recommended to have a well-defined data strategy in place before embarking on an AI strategy. And that's because of what I said before, particularly those AI and machine learning algorithms. They're heavily dependent on data for training and operation. And without access to that high quality and relevant and properly curated data, generally the performance and reliability of machine learning models, artificial intelligence models, they're potentially going to be compromised, which is why that data strategy is so important. And it isn't just Sean from Firebrand kind of saying this. The likes of Amazon and Google and Apple and Facebook, they all have very, very different business strategies that they've used to gain their current market dominance. And they have got market dominance. I don't think anyone can argue that. But their common success, you could argue, is due to their foresight in understanding the value of data and positioning themselves really early into the market. And according to, and it isn't all a bed of roses, there are lots and lots of studies going around this type of stuff. And lots of organizations globally are working on getting their first AI deployment. About 70% of organizations, you could say, are looking to kind of make that move into artificial intelligence. And the way they'll do that is through pilots. And they'll select areas and maybe data-enabled products that they can use to pilot. And with the idea of once this pilot is either proven to be successful or unsuccessful, it might require a tweak, but they're looking for that large scale business transformation. But that hasn't quite happened yet because data and AI in a lot of people's eyes are still niche activities. They're not necessarily a core competence of the business. And I think over time, what we'll find, and it's probably pertinent for the education space as well, we'll probably find less specific roles around data and maybe less specific training around data. Maybe not less specific training, but certainly less specific roles around data, because the functions of those roles will be assimilated into different roles. Everyone will need to be data-led. Everyone will need to be comfortable with data analytics and decision-led learning, which might not necessarily facilitate kind of specific roles in that area. But like I said, it isn't all a bed of roses. And in some cases, people whisper about the project which must not be named. And Bayer, who are a famous and a well-known German pharmaceutical company, they've humorously adapted and dubbed the habit of continuous piloting as pilotitis. And because this is so important, because management often grows increasingly impatient and wonders how to get out of that rut. And we do see that with some of the research and some of the conversations we have with clients. They're constantly trying to pilot this technology, but generally those pilots are failing. And quite often those pilots are failing because they haven't got this key bit here nailed, and they haven't really got it in terms of, it's not a golden thread running through their organization, and it quite often needs to be because of the importance and the synergies with AI strategies. So if Sean is banging on about a data strategy so much, and to really consider where you are in terms of data maturity and developing a data strategy before getting into that artificial intelligence space and place, I'm not stupid. I've worked in business for a long old time, and I know that senior leaders, not that they get on the hype train, but they do see a new bit of technology and they want to be the first people. They want to be pioneers in terms of that technology. And actually people that say pause and just let's consider how we're going to do this, sometimes we're listened to and sometimes we're not. So actually we need to start to look at the practical requirements. If someone in the organization is saying, well, we haven't got a strong enough data strategy to really move into AI, you can't just say that. You've got to have a suggestion about how do we get a stronger data strategy. And there are obviously lots and lots of different approaches. And again, this is not an exhaustive or definitive list of the steps that you would need to go through, but actually this gives you a pretty decent understanding about some of those key aspects that you would need in order to be able to develop a data strategy. And it starts at, like I said before, it starts with that business mission, business goals. And those business missions and business goals lead to requirements from organizations, requirements at an individual level, or a team level, a divisional level, however you want to cut it. But they're going to have specific data requirements. It might be they want data to support decision-making processes. It might be they want data to performance manage their team or some of their operational activity. But people are going to have data requirements. And actually, it might be incumbent on the individual they're helping develop these strategies to help people understand what their data requirements should be or might be, because maybe they're in a situation they're not necessarily able to really articulate them. So once we know what the business wants, we're confident in terms of the business goals, we know where the business and what the business wants from a data point of view. The next stage, a little bit about like business analytics, is to define the as is. Then the reason we define the as is, and we take that close look, introspective look in terms of how we do data, is because if we don't know where we stand today, we have absolutely no idea what a change looks like into the future, and whether that change is better than the position that we're in. So it's really important to understand where we are in terms of the data as is. Where do we stand today? Because if we don't know where we stand today, we don't know what better looks like. And that feeds in really nicely to some of the kind of tangible specifics that we would want to do in terms of maybe developing a new data strategy involving existing one. And that's auditing. What data do we have? Where does it come from? Where's it stored? How accurate is it? How clean is it? Does our architecture facilitate kind of seamless use of that data? So once we define the as is, we start to look in terms of where we are around auditing our data and architecture capability. And then we're into a relatively cool place around what is the art of the possible. We know what the business mission and goals are. We know where we stand. We know kind of what our data is and our technology around it is. But then that should give us quite a good springboard to start to considering the art of the possible. Where could we be? Where do we want to be in terms of our use of data? Do we want to automate all of our decisions from data? Do we want to help data develop our business strategies? Do we want to help it retain more customers? Exactly what do we want to do? What is this art of the possible? And clearly that'll be characterized specifically for the organization that you're kind of working, or the domain you're working in. Once we know where we are, exactly where we are, and where we start to thinking about where we could be, it's the time to define what's called the target operating model. So the TOM, define our data target operating model. We know where we want to get to. Let's start to define what the future kind of looks like. And once we know where we want to be and we know where we've come from, really the trick is to focus on the bit in the middle, to focus on the gaps, typical gap analysis piece. So we know where we want to be, we know where we've come from, we know the gaps. And once we know the gaps, we know, and we can start to attribute work streams and processes and projects to move us from the as is to the to be. So we're actively on that kind of pathway to move to a more informed, maybe a better place in terms of the way that we use data. Then we can, we've got a really strong footing then to define or evolve. I'm not saying that no organizations have a data strategy. I think it's one thing to have one and put it on paper. It's an entirely different thing to make sure that it's governed and actually adhere to. But then we're in a place where we can start to define and evolve potentially our data strategy. Then we're in a really good place to start offering new products and services, maybe data products and services as well. So we really are starting to change the DNA of our organizations by potentially being able to offer different products and services. We shouldn't, again, and probably one of the key kind of phrases for me, it's not all a bed of roses. We start to need to define those ethical data principles. How do we want to operate in this new data space? What kind of ethical and moral compass do we want to have? And we can't really govern how ethical or ethically responsible, or how responsible we are in terms of artificial intelligence, until we start to define some of those principles. So that's where that kind of stage comes in. And then you can write as many things as you want on a bit of paper and in a business case, but if you're not governing that data strategy, largely speaking, the creation of it is pointless. There's no, I can write a data strategy in a day, but actually that's not the tricky thing. The tricky thing is changing the culture in an organization, evangelizing the use of data within an organization. Whilst governance might not be the sexiest bit of business, it's an absolutely fundamental piece of business. Because like I said, you could write a data strategy, but unless you're actively looking to see how it's implemented, it really is just a piece of paper at that stage. You really do need to have a robust and bought in kind of data governance process. So hopefully they are some of the steps that you might want to consider in terms of developing that data strategy. But I suppose as you're going through this cycle, you've always got that one eye on that AI space. And actually, if we're going to look for an example data strategy, whilst if you were on my Responsible AI webinar last time, you'll note that the UK doesn't quite yet have any AI legislation. You'll also remember the EU does, so we're a little bit behind our European partners. But what we do have is a national AI strategy. And the idea behind that AI strategy, hopefully, and for kind of a British citizen, hopefully it's to take the UK to the absolute forefront of artificial intelligence. That's what I want from our approach to AI. I want the UK to be global leaders in this kind of technology, because the benefits that we can get as a country are going to be absolutely huge. And I think we've got the right educational frameworks, we've got the right kind of open and democratic society to be able to do this. We are in a really good position to be the global leaders of artificial intelligence, which is why we need important documents like this national AI strategy. So clearly the idea is to help drive that adoption, and the aim of the strategy is to increase that widespread adoption of AI tech across the UK, particularly in sectors such as healthcare, finance, and manufacturing. And one of the, not necessarily a surprising focus, but one of the main focuses is supporting businesses, especially those small, medium SMEs, those small, medium-sized enterprises, helping them implement AI solutions. I think it's fair to say if we take that example of data kind of maturity, if you're looking at some of the long-standing banks within the UK, or maybe in the insurance sector, some of those organizations have been around for hundreds of years. They're sitting on huge amounts and huge volumes of data, but they've also got the architecture to be able to supply information to banking customers internally as well. They've actually relatively mature in that kind of data space. So it's quite surprising, maybe not surprising, but quite actually interesting and heartening to see the strategy kind of focus those small, medium and SME businesses, because it's going to be probably markedly more challenging for them to enter that world of AI. And hopefully this strategy can help. We also need investment as well. There needs to be investment in AI research and development, and the strategy will commit significant funding and resources to advance that AI research piece in the UK. So it could be investments in machine learning, natural language processing, computer vision, as well as the development of AI hardware and infrastructure. And it's really difficult not to see the rise of NVIDIA over the last kind of 5 to 10 years. And for those that don't know, NVIDIA used to purely develop graphical processing units, GPUs for computers, for gamers, for people like me could spend £2,000 on a really powerful graphics processor. And there's probably a lot of you thinking, why would you ever even consider that? Well, it transpires those GPUs are really good for training AI models as well. And that's predominantly why NVIDIA have seen such a huge increase in the kind of value of their company. And with probably not too distant future, they may well be the most valuable organization in the entire globe as well. And it'd be really cool for the UK to get a slice of that pie. There's clearly large amounts of growth to be had in this training of data and this hardware kind of infrastructure around artificial intelligence. It'd be really cool for the UK to kind of lead the light on that as well. But again, not all a bed of roses. We need to make sure it's responsibly developed. And so the strategy emphasizes the importance of developing those AI systems in a responsible and an ethical and in a transparent manner as well. And whilst we don't have any legislation specifically around AI quite yet, the plan or the strategy outlines governance frameworks, regulatory guidelines, and some of those ethical principles to develop the deployment of AI. Probably one of the things that's closest to Firebrand's heart is in terms of developing that AI talent and skills. And so the strategy, again, aims to build a robust pipeline of AI talent in the UK. So it could be in expanding initiatives like the STEM initiative, upskilling people in maths, upskilling existing workforces, reskilling people, etc., etc. And if you remember, maybe a year ago now, Rishi Sunak was suggesting that maybe as a country, we wanted to move maths, and it's mandatorily taught up to GCSE level. Maybe we want to shift that up to A level. And for me, that was around artificial intelligence. These AI algorithms are so heavily based on statistics, and statistics is actually a very complex kind of element of mathematics. The more knowledgeable we are as a country around maths, the easier we're going to be able to assimilate and understand this AI technology as well. But we are just not necessarily a small island, but we have always punched above our weight. But definitely that international collaboration and influence piece is really important as well. So the strategy recognizes the need for that international cooperation and coordination on AI governance and standards. There really is little point having a significantly different approach to legislation in the EU than in the UK than in the US as well. And clearly there's lots more of the globe exists, but it'd be really cool. We almost had a global approach to the governance of AI, because actually I think that's going to be for the benefit of everybody. And so the strategy commits the UK to that active participation in global dialogues and shaping that international landscape in terms of that responsible AI development as well. And then maybe kind of lastly, in terms of that national AI strategy, and potentially one that's actually really specific to the UK, and we've been labouring, maybe that's the wrong choice of words, we've been deliberating as a society and at government in terms of how we transform our public sector. And this is something that we've probably been doing for the last 15 or 20 years and will probably continue to do for the next 20 years as well. So that the strategy actually includes plans in terms of utilising AI technology to improve and modernise the delivery of public services, healthcare, education, government operations, anything that fills the potholes in, as long as it's legal and appropriate, is a good thing, definitely in my eyes. So for the UK particularly, and I've not necessarily seen this in other government-led kind of national AI strategies, is that specific focus on public sector transformation as well. So actually, how do we start to develop an AI strategy? Maybe we're in that place where we're confident in terms of our data maturity. We've got a really robust data strategy that's evolving in line with client needs, with market needs, with business objectives. We've really got almost a dedicated focus around that data strategy. Then we're in that position potentially to really start to focus in on artificial intelligence. And so what are the kind of pillars that we would need in order to develop a really robust and good AI strategy? Well, the first thing is that vision piece. So it's the alignment of AI's future capabilities, which is actually quite a difficult thing to do, to future or to be a bit of a futurologist in terms of AI capabilities, given how quickly they're kind of evolving over time. But we need to align those AI capabilities with our business strategy. We need to state those AI goals really clearly, because that's going to encourage both internal and external people in terms of enabling the organization to move to that place. But we also need that organizational fluency. And we're starting to roam into kind of communication aspects. How do we, once we've defined our business strategy, how do we communicate out to everyone within the business? But actually, by doing that, that's going to help us fund the right use cases for AI. I think it's fair to say with every emergence of every new technology, organizations have invested in certain places and not all of those investments have come off. And that is the reality of business. Clearly, the reality of business is trying to minimize the amount of money we waste in areas that aren't going to derive or deliver that return on investment. But if we specify maybe how, for instance, generative AI, how that's going to drive our business goals, and we can start to set AI success metrics as well. So once we've got that vision, we've aligned that vision to the capabilities and the future capabilities of AI, we need to think, is there value in doing this? We need to make sure there's a return on investment for these AI initiatives. No organization can continually invest in initiatives that don't come off, that don't get a return on investment, because those organizations won't be around in a few years. So we need to think about whether they're going to deliver us enhanced productivity. Maybe they're going to generate groundbreaking innovations. Maybe they're going to improve experiences for our customers and our employees as well. And so it's really important to be able to quantify the value that we can generate for artificial intelligence, because that's going to help us make really strong business cases and guide our investment decisions. Bearing in mind that whilst you could put it in a business case, that's not a guarantee to get a return on investment by any stretch of the imagination. And then we're into the cost space. So cost benefit analysis. Maybe we can start to generate projections for how much it's going to cost us to get more engineering talent into the business. Maybe some of the tools that we'll need. Maybe we need to change our infrastructure, invest in our current infrastructure. What are some of those operational expenses? Is there any kind of expense around increased regulatory compliance as well? So it's really important to understand that TCO, that total cost of ownership, because that's going to help us avoid unexpected expenses and support those really informed budgeting practices as well. But it's a little bit like a data strategy. I could write a cost benefit analysis and make it look like it's an absolute no-brainer, but unless we have a robust benefits realization process, and cost benefit analysis is the idea of, if I invest £500,000, actually the benefit I'm going to get back is £1 million. And actually, it's relatively simple to write that down in a business strategy or a business case and provide some of the underlying detail about how you're going to get there. What's probably more tricky and much more challenging for organizations is that cost benefit analysis. So I've said I'm going to realize £1 million worth of revenue or operational efficiencies after implementing this business case. Well, actually, the benefits realization process is we'll go and find it. You've had a year since you've implemented this new process. You said you were going to save me £1 million. Well, where's that £1 million? Show me that £1 million. A really, really important process, because it is too easy to write something that's just an absolute no-brainer in terms of a business case. But if you don't have that robust benefits realization process, you're probably in kind of that almost circle of doom. Develop a really fancy looking business case. It's absolute no-brainer. Implement it. Find out over time that it hasn't really developed what you need it to develop or deliver in terms of those costs. Risk assessment is also fundamentally important as well. So we need to be more comfortable, and I think a lot of organizations are comfortable in terms of risk identification, risk scoring, risk mitigation, and some of the governance that wraps around it. And we're going to have to slightly deviate our approach to risk, not significantly. Those fundamental concepts of identification, kind of assessment of impact, and the mitigation are still going to be there, but we're going to have to start moving our focus onto things like assessing the model quality. How secure is our model? How private is it? How prone to bias is it? How transparent is it? How compliant is it? We're going to really need to start to focus and reshift our kind of risk assessment processes. If we're going to go into this AI space, we're going to need to make sure they're incorporated, and that that governance is essential for that ethical and responsible adoption of those AI technologies, because the reputational risk of not responsibly implementing these AI strategies could remove organizations and business quite easily. And then we're into probably quite a cool and operational space in terms of that adoption. So what is our organizational readiness in terms of adoption? Do we have the right talent in place? Is the right infrastructure in place? Probably most importantly, do we have the right data? Do we have the right governance processes? Are we in a position to identify any gaps that could hinder AI success, because if we identify gaps, then we can start to wrap around work in order to mitigate those gaps and to fill those gaps as well. And then after we've gone through all of those elements, then we're in a transformation space. So it might require the creation of new roles. It might be that we're now able to really engineer existing processes, develop new processes. It might be that we need to realign our existing policies to ensure that artificial intelligence is seamlessly integrated into the organizational fabric. And I think that's the end goal for a lot of organizations that want to go down this AI pathway. And actually, as I'm saying it, that's the kind of goal for any organization wanting to do something new and transformative. It's that integration into that organizational fabric. So you don't have to spend dedicated time and effort thinking about it. It's that golden thread. It's that seamless integration space that we're really all looking for. So that's the strategy. Once we've got the strategy, then we're starting to be in a place where we can look to kind of implement AI. So what kind of stages might we need to follow? Well, the first one is that business requirement. And I think we touched on it a couple of slides earlier. What do we want to solve? What's the problem? What process can we improve? What new approach to using data might we be able to take? And that might require an element of research. That what is the art of the possible piece? What are our competitors doing? What are our non-competitors doing, but they've got maybe similar issues? What's the latest evolution and the capability of that technology? Do we buy an off-the-shelf product? Are there any ethical or privacy considerations? Do we need to have different types of domain knowledge? And actually that research process might start to inform that business requirements. That's why I've got a bit of a cyclical kind of arrow approach to those two different stages. And once we've gone through those stages, we're really sure what the business requirement is. We know exactly what we want. We want this type of machine learning. We want this type of artificial intelligence. We want it to do this thing. Then we're in a start where we can start to prepare our data. So what data do we need? Is it clean? Is it structured? Do we need to change the way it's collected or stored or processed? Do we need to normalize the data, which is the process of taking lots and lots of raw data, and the normalization process is breaking it down into tables, and that's how relational databases work. Do we need to enrich any of our existing data sets? Do we need to procure new ones? What are the most important data variables or features that our models require? Do we need to have an enhanced focus on some of those really important variables within our data sets? Then we're into I suppose almost a data science space. What machine learning or AI algorithm or model is needed? Do we need single modal AI, which might be the ability to transmit or translate speech to text, or do we need a multimodal AI? There's speech to text, there's text to speech, it's got a vision capability, it's got a generative AI capability. That's multimodal AI, where we're starting to take those, I suppose, those elements of artificial narrow intelligence, we're starting to add them onto each other. What can we do to minimize training data bias? How do we manage the tuning process as well? So once we've got that, we've selected our model and we've given it a load of training data, it's generally not fit for purpose there and then. We have to go through a whole process of tuning it and telling it what the most important variables are. And then maybe the trickiest bit, and I think this for me is probably the trickiest bit, is that deployment bit. How do we plug that really accurate, really important machine learning model into our operational business? How do we make it seamless? What's that seamless integration look like? So we need to ask ourselves, is our architecture fit for purpose? How do we productionize it once we're happy with that model and happy that it performs in a consistent and accurate way? And this is really tricky because apart from those digitally native companies and their organizations that have only ever grown up in the kind of digital space, lots of existing organizations, companies that have been around for a couple of 100 years, they quite often have lots and lots of legacy infrastructure. And generally that legacy infrastructure adds loads and loads and loads of complexity throughout this process, particularly if that legacy infrastructure for some reason holds really important data that's going to help that model. Trying to manage that and deploy that efficiently and effectively is often super, super tricky. And once we've gone through all those stages, we know what we want, we've identified what we want, We've made sure that what we want in terms of an AI model is really accurate. It's doing exactly what we want. We've plugged it into our operational fabric. It's seamlessly integrated it. These things are never static, particularly if they're getting retrained all the time with different data. So we need to have processes to performance manage these models. And then what metrics do we need to monitor those models and ensure the implementation behaves and reacts in a way that we want? What governance processes do we need to augment or spin up to monitor those metrics? Do we use existing governance processes? Do we develop a new one? Potentially, and I think probably the path of least resistance is plugging this governance into existing governance processes. But with one eye on, the likelihood is the governance around these models is going to become so important and all encompassing. There's probably going to be separate governance processes that spin out of it after not too long a period of time. And then we're into kind of some of the other bits around kind of the efficient and effective implementation of data and AI strategies. Because when using data, we're clearly going to want to use it to ensure compliance with privacy legislation. Everyone knows the privacy legislation in the UK, the Data Protection Act, that's got revenue related fines. And the way that I characterize those, eye-watering amounts of money, generally speaking. It could be millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of pounds worth of fines if we don't get our data protection and privacy governance on point. The likelihood is that when the UK does have legislation and regulation around artificial intelligence, I would be utterly shocked if it didn't have fines and if those fines weren't revenue related, because they need to have teeth. They absolutely have to have teeth. Clearly, the government needs to support organisations adhere to them, but for those organisations that wantonly kind of breach the legislation and regulations, there needs to be penalties of that. I think that is definitely fair to say. And the goal of developing these privacy regulations and data protection regulations, which we're all probably quite mature at doing, the real trick is, and this is really easy to say and actually really difficult to do, is not to write those policies in terms of the as is. We need to write those policies for the future as well, because what we don't want to do is develop policies that are going to hinder the development of maybe hyper-targeted AI models. We need to be writing these policies that are going to allow us that flexibility to develop artificial intelligence, but definitely in that kind of responsible manner. And a really good team for setting up those company-wide privacy policies, kind of best practice around that, is really a combination of different skills. So it could be business owners and privacy lawyers and AI strategists, maybe data scientists as well. Maybe those AI strategists are specifically there to have that technical background, but also they're able to translate those business use cases. So too many times data scientists have been criticized for not being able to communicate at all levels of the business effectively enough. And one of the answers to that is to have that AI strategist, someone that fundamentally understands the domain and the business requirements and the mission and the goals and the values, but they've also got that technical capability as well. So they can kind of translate those business cases, those business requirements to someone that's much more technical in terms of those data scientists. You've almost got that bridge between the business and some of the really techie, nerdy stuff that's going on in terms of that machine learning piece. We need to consider whether we need maybe a different member of staff there. Maybe there's that role and that creation of that role around that AI ethicist place. Maybe we need to, as organizations, start to look at how some of the legislation is developing around the regulation of AI. And if you're on my last webinar, we went through in a little bit of detail the EU AI Act, and they broke down different risk levels in terms of the implementation of artificial intelligence. It might be that organizations need to take a similar approach in terms of risk scoring or putting into categories some of their art of the possible pieces around what they could do with AI. And actually, it might not be any bad thing to kind of align with some of the regulation that's likely to happen. And I hope the UK will take a similar approach, a similar risk-based approach that the EU will have, because that will make that interoperation between the EU and Britain around AI much more effective, I think. But one thing we really can't forget are those human skills. And the data and AI journeys and the transformations are going to require new roles in organizations. The exact role terminology might vary, but generally speaking, we're probably going to see AI roles across 4 different business processes or business areas. So within business units and business functions, so that could be sales, marketing, or finance. Within separate and defined data science or business intelligence teams, we're going to see new roles in data management teams as well. And we're potentially going to see new roles in that architecture piece around data platforms and kind of technical solutions. And when we're talking about those business cases to kick off that development or that journey around AI, those business cases should come from this level. And in additional to the actual business people, that's where that role of the AI strategist. The AI strategist is going to sit, if that's the way that the market goes, it's going to sit in between the business functions and the kind of data science functions as well. And remember that AI strategist is going to be that individual that translates that business vision and goals into a data and AI requirement. So they're going to take that burden away from those business units, allowing those business units to focus on their sales and marketing and finance responsibilities. But in the future, they may well have that individual AI person that can understand what they're doing as a function and translate it and communicate that in terms of those data and AI requirements. And a lot of organizations don't have this role. But actually, potentially, it's going to be one of the most critical roles in that successful implementation and execution of those AI projects. Because without that strategist at an AI level, that communication distance between the people with the business background and the data scientists who are actually going to take that model, give it the data, and tune it, that's quite often too wide. And because it's too wide, it can take a long old time to align it. So we want to get a kind of quicker resolution. We need to put someone in the middle, that AI strategist that can communicate both left and right in terms of the diagram I'm trying to depict with my arms. And whilst most organizations, they do lack an AI strategist, it isn't a role that they've got, a lot of them have hired data scientists. And they're becoming much more aware in terms of the different educational backgrounds those data scientists are coming from. And quite often they're coming from quantitative backgrounds. So it could be computer science, math, statistics, physics, or engineering. And it does make sense to kind of complement those data science teams with individuals from different types of educational backgrounds. There's a big thing around that diversity and the minimization of discrimination and bias within these AI algorithms. And if you have a team of data scientists that are all a single gender, they come from a same ethnicity, they've been a product of very similar environments, you might well end up translating and transmitting those biases. Whereas if you have more diverse teams, with any luck, you're going to start to have a more diverse approach as well. But a really common mistake that we see in business is to only hire that data scientist role and not fill roles such as data engineers, data architects, performance or platform engineers, solution architects. And what that really does is that ends up with a huge amount of frustration, both from the business and from the data science team. And quite often these data scientists are retrieving and building their own databases, where actually that kind of architecture should be there for them already. So that's some of the roles. We've talked about kind of the data maturity bit, the requirement for a data strategy, how we would maybe go about building an AI strategy, how we might then go about implementing AI. But actually, from an optimal point of view, and this will depend on the kind of organization's position, maturity, size, etc., etc., etc. Establishing a center of excellence actually is probably a pretty good idea, because that's going to help bring an organizational focus to the topic. And depending on where that center of excellence sits in a company, it's going to be responsible for different areas. It might consist of data science teams, it might consist of business intelligence teams, but generally those roles, they've tended to sit potentially in IT. And actually, is that the right place for them to sit? So by developing a center of excellence, not only do you get an organizational focus, you actually get more appropriate places for some individuals, some roles to sit, whereas they might not have sat in the most appropriate place in the past. And that's going to allow you to have a central hub for AI strategy, governance, and best practice. It's going to help you drive AI adoption and capabilities across your entire organization, in addition to providing training, tooling, resources to help individuals across your organization build that AI skills that are so actually sought after and needed. They're going to help you establish policies and standards and ethical guidelines for AI use. That's going to promote that responsible and trustworthy AI. That's going to hopefully align with organizational's core values as well. In addition, it's going to facilitate collaboration and knowledge sharing on AI projects. Too often, they are really isolated in an organization, and actually, they need to be co-located. That's going to ensure better business cases as well. It's going to more frequently identify high value AI cases and opportunities that organizations can really get their teeth into. And it will drive consistency and quality in terms of the way those AI models are used and operationalized as well. And those metrics that I spoke about before, and us getting more comfortable with different types of metrics around performance management and governance, that's going to be a much easier ask if you've got a separate team or center of excellence or collection of individuals to do that as well. And they'll also act as that AI evangelist, that individual or collection of individuals that goes out and talks around the positivity around AI literacy and cultural change, but can also bring to life some of the complex challenges that are around this move to artificial intelligence as well. Pretty much on time, couple of slides to go. Just quite a complicated webinar, one that's kind of touched on lots of different areas. So kind of to conclude, if you were to ask me, and whilst it might not be the quickest to market approach, it's probably the lowest risk, highest profit approach. Think about that data strategy first. Think about your maturity first. Think about your analytics, your data science, your data engineering, your data architecture, all with a view to move to AI. Get comfortable in that business translation bit in terms of translating your business and digital strategies into data and AI visions. Start to identify some of those business processes where you want to use AI. Start to really look introspectively in terms of the current state of your data and AI capabilities, and honesty is absolutely key. There's no point fooling ourselves in terms of how capable we are around data and AI, because that will just lead to no return on investment and investments in the wrong area. Start to describe the target state for where your business wants to be in terms of processes or optimization, wherever you want it to be, once those data and AI capabilities have become a little bit better understood. Start to describe and define new data-driven business ideas and product ideas. Start to think about roadmaps, including investments as well, because these things aren't going to be free and they aren't necessarily going to be cheap, but if they're done correctly, they are going to generate a big return on investment. And start to develop a playbook as well. Start to get familiar with developing a playbook, and again, evangelizing that throughout the business as well. And then you're in a really strong place to start to automate and scale up those operations as well. And so Firebrand, clearly we can help on that journey. We have more and more artificial intelligence courses coming online every day. Our product team are absolutely beavering away at linking in with our vendors, finding new vendors in order to bring you the best, the most up-to-date, the most impactful artificial intelligence training there is on the market. The link at the top there will take you to our website page, which has got all of our AI courses. Helpfully, I think I've collared those different AI courses that we've got on at the moment in terms of foundation, intermediate, and advanced level. And as a side benefit of attending the AI webinar, and I'll let Anita take you through this, we can also help you on your AI learning journey as well.
Thanks, Sean. Fantastic webinar. So just before you all drop off, just as Sean said there, what you might not have actually realised is you've already started your learning journey. And if you use the link that's in the chat, that is a link through to the Microsoft Learn platform, where you can actually log in and claim the badge for the AI 900, the Azure AI Fundamentals. Some of the content that you've been hearing today is already within that pathway. So you can log into the platform. There'll be a number of badges in there that you can share away with your LinkedIn network.
And at that point, are there any questions? And for those that want to know, these are a question and answers image from Bing image creators. Other image generators are available in the style of Wengechi Mutu, so a famous African artist. And that is the power of image creation. There you go. But I will stop sharing and have a look at the chat and see if there's any questions in there.
There's just one, Sean, that I can pose to you. So Toby asks, How do UK adopt, adapt and plan to be global leaders against competitors such as China and the US?
You know
Heavy
what?
question.
Yeah, it's quite heavy. That's like an entire webinar in itself. I think we need to play on some of the fundamentals of British society. So there's lots and lots of theory and kind of conjecture on this type of thing, but the more open your country is, the more kind of democratic, the more freedom of speech, the freedom of information, the more freedom of movement that countries have. Generally, they tend to make the bigger leaps in terms of creativity and advancing the kind of use of technology. So fundamentally, the way that our country is structured should allow us to start developing these new types of technology. But there's there's billions and billions of pounds of investment in terms of education. There's billions and billions of pounds that we invest as a country every single year in varying elements. What we probably need to do is just be really sure about where we do want to invest this type of money. We are a rich country, regardless of how it feels and how inflation has bit us as a society. We are still a very well-off country. And maybe it's just about tactically investing some of that wealth in really, really specific areas. But we've got the education system, we've got the further education and higher education system. We've got organizations like Firebrand that are ready, willing, and able to kind of help organizations. You know what, I think it's that realization. A lot of it comes from government investment, be it tax breaks, be it specific investment in education and skills. So a lot of it does come from the government creating almost a business environment for organizations to get into that place. So whilst I'm not shirking any of the responsibility from a private training provider point of view, there is a huge part our government can play. And clearly that is a very difficult conversation to have, because we're probably going to go into a general election in the not too distant future. And it isn't just AI that needs investment. There's a lot of places in the UK that needs investment, but actually sometimes I'm a firm believer you need to speculate to accumulate. So whilst it might not come off our national debt, actually the benefit of investing billions of pounds in a specific area could over a generation pay a huge kind of dividend. So as a country, how do we do it? Everybody gets on the same page. We have really tactical and focused investment in places. And you know what? It probably goes beyond party political things. So this isn't going to be a 4-year plan or an 8-year plan in line with the way that our general elections go. This needs to be a generational plan over the next 25 years, moving aside from Labour, Reform, Conservatives. How do we as a country get to that place? How do we become the Silicon Valley of AI? And I think we've got the constituent parts to do it. We just need the right investment and the right thought. But hopefully, I've never a short answer from Sean. That's for certain.
Not at all. That's brilliant. Thanks, Sean. Jonathan did post a question about the Sprint website. The eagle-eyed amongst you will see there's nothing listed at the moment, but our next series that will go live will be a data series. So I'm sure you've absolutely heard from Sean today that you can't even think about AI unless you've got your data in place. So join us for the next webinar series all about data. Thanks ever so much, everybody, for attending. And Sean, thank you so much again.
My pleasure. Thank you very much for listening.
Thank you.